My name is Arline Welty. I'm a solutions consultant at Galeforce Consulting. And the thing I'm going to be showing in this session is how we can manipulate data in acuMatica based on the result of a generic inquiry. So what we're going to do is actually link that inquiry to a subscriber, which in our case is going to be an import scenario. And that's going to be invoked via this business event. That's what's going to tie it all together. So this is one of the most powerful features of acuMatica in my view, because it's codeless configuration. So it has the accessibility going for it. And B, it's embedded in the product. So I have history with a competing ERP system and have a lot of experience, and is one of my specializations in writing automations and writing integrations, but that always had to happen in an external product. So one of the things that I want to toast to is that in acuMatica, we can do this all within the core product. We can write these integrations and write these automations by doing what I'm going to show you here. And this is just one approach, one way to do the data manipulation and data transformation that is possible with import scenarios, but it's all going to happen automatically. Okay, so when I was thinking about how to present this, I know someone on this chat was saying you were saying, yes, I'm very visual, and I am too. And when I was thinking of how to present this, I was thinking like these three pieces are all together, right? There's an inquiry, there's a business event, and a subscriber. But the business event is like the hinge that connects them. So you're like in the system, you've already written inquiries, right? You're using them for gadgets on your dashboard, or you're using them for screen modifications or for reporting functions. And you've probably also written import scenarios. Before we started, a couple of folks acknowledged, yes, you've written import scenarios, obviously both when you initially set up your system, but also throughout the life of the acuMatica system, there's going to be data that we want to import. But the business event is the hinge that gets these together. So the hinge is what sort of makes it interesting, because we can say, because of X, do Y. So in our case, we're going to say, okay, this is the business case or the business story, which is, let me find all the sales orders in the system that at some point someone put them on hold for whatever reason, manually or automatically or for whatever business reason, but now they need to come off hold. Like we have to find all of those. So the scenario I'm thinking of is maybe in our case, the customer was put on hold. They've got all these open orders in the system. The customer's on hold. Okay, the orders can't be processed or shipped until they are taken off hold. So what we need to do, and this is where our inquiry comes into place, is we need to find all the orders that are in this state, all the orders that are on hold, but basically shouldn't be on hold. And we want to release them from hold so that we can ship the order, get it out the door, and obviously invoice. Okay, so that's the concept in terms of what I'm expecting to show you. And the goal here is to really supplement what you'll find in the existing acuMatica product documentation, which is very helpful. But one of the goals with this session is to sort of show you the process all the way through, so you can see how all the pieces fit together in this specific way to use acuMatica. Okay, so remember what I said, we're trying to find all the orders that are on hold. And what we're going to do is basically trap those with an inquiry. And then through the hinge of the business event, we'll invoke the import scenario, and that will take the action of taking them off hold. So what you're looking at here is like a specific order. Okay, this is order 19, and you can see a couple things about this order. It's got the status of on hold, as you can see. So we know that's probably going to get caught. And then we've got this description in here. I'm going to show you this later. I think this is just something to note. Like right now, all we know about it is, okay, Customer's on hold per Maria. Maria knows. Okay, so that's just an example. And what I'm doing here is I'm just refreshing this generic inquiry to show you that we're getting the most recent results in the system for this inquiry for orders that are on hold, but shouldn't be. So I'll just take a look at the conditions, right? So the specific scenario I'm trapping is the customer status is active. So the customer is no longer on hold, and the SO order, so the sales order status, is on hold. Okay, so whatever inquiry you write, the conditions are up to you and up to the business to make sure that you trap those properly. And this is really the first part. Like, we're thinking of this, the hinge is like an if-then statement. If there are results in here, then do X. In our case, then invoke this import scenario to take them off hold. So we're looking at the conditions here just to confirm this is what we're seeing. And in our preview, we'll see, okay, this order number 19 that we looked at earlier is indeed in this status. So who knows, you could have like 25 or 25,000 orders in this status and they would all be included. And we'll talk about that in a minute. One of the things I want to point out, and I told you in the session description that we were going to talk about pitfalls and headaches to avoid. We're getting to our first one, which is naming conventions. I want to give some credit to CS3 Consulting Group. They came up with a convention that I'm embellishing a little bit, but I think is really useful, which is if you look at my event, so we're just about to write this event, right? The event ID is BEBE order status change. C, the generic inquiry, is BEGI order status change. So just on the topic of naming conventions, I have noticed that Acumatica is very flexible, but it also allows whoever is writing the inquiries, the business events, the import scenarios, the screens, you can put whatever name you want in there. And what I think what can happen is that it creates this proliferation of just screens and data that are really hard to connect when it's upgrade time or you want to test anything that you've done. And if you have a way to tie them together and make it clear to you and people who support your work afterward, or people who are in the system, you know, after you've created it, you will do yourself and them a huge favor by linking these. So the naming convention I'm suggesting here is that since what we're doing is a business event, that it starts with BE. So the inquiry I wrote has this prefix, BEGI, order status change. Okay, so what I was thinking there is business event, generic inquiry, order status change. And then you'll see on the business event itself, it's BE and then BE. So this is like the actual event part of the business event. And the suffix then is also the same, order status change. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that I also think words are important. So when we're thinking about what the point of this business event is, it's whatever the business says it is. We need to change the order status, right? I think it's useful to think of the so what, like why are we doing this? What is the outcome? Crystallize that for yourself and then use that as the suffix so you can tie it all together. So what we've seen is BEGI, generic inquiry, order status change. And now we're looking at BE, order status change. So this is how we realize that these are all meant to be part of the same construction or part of the same package. So, you know, I would recommend using something like this. You could always add, you know, an abbreviation of the business partner or the author, initials, something like that, so it's clear that it is something additional. But naming conventions are big, and you will save yourself a ton of time by first thinking thoroughly about what the name should be, what the so what is, what I'm doing, and then using that prefix in this case BE, and then whatever it is, in this case BE, to identify what goes together. These business events can be configured in lots of interesting ways. So what I've chosen is trigger by schedule, which means we create a schedule, which you'll see, and every time that schedule comes up, the business event checks, and if there are data to process, then the subscriber is invoked. But you could also build this trigger by record change or trigger by action. So if you are going to trigger by record change, you would want to think to yourself, what are the before and after values of the field or fields that I want to track in my business event? So that's a possibility that, that you can ponder. And trigger by action is also something you can configure in these trigger conditions. For raise event, you've also got multiple choices. So what I've selected is raise the event for each record. So that means for every row in the generic inquiry results, take an action. So every single row, and I'm only returning header rows, right? I'm returning the order header values. Act upon that order header value, that specific one. But you could do it once for all records or for a group of records, depending on how you want the event to process. Okay, I made my description match my event ID recommended. Okay, so this is another thing that I think is easy to get wrong, which is the business event is what we're configuring now. But you've got to define a screen name for the business event. And I think one thing that can be tempting is just get the order screen. It's like, that's what we're affecting. But that's not right. The screen that we're using is going to be BEGI. Remember, that's my inquiry order status change. So we're kind of, the screen name, maybe think of it in this case as like the source name. The data is coming from the results in this generic inquiry, and we're going to process for each record, each row in this generic inquiry. So the trigger conditions can be linked to what I mentioned before. If you did trigger by record change, you can see you would define the table name, let's say SO order, field name, status, and the condition, and you choose the to and from values. So in my case, since I chose trigger by schedule, I don't need anything in the trigger conditions. But in the schedule, which I'll show you, I have it running right now. And this is something I would suggest just for testing would be, I have it running very frequently. I have it running every 2 minutes for testing. Now, I think when you're in production, it's probably a little more prudent to think what's the longest we could go rather than how frequently can I do this. And you'll notice the naming convention here is the same too, right? So I'm trying to keep it all together visually. Okay, so this is the fun part. So this is the subscriber that's associated with my business event. So remember the hinge. We looked at the inquiry, we checked the conditions of those inquiries. We saw we had one order in the result set. Okay, great. The business event is the hinge that we're configuring right now and trying to use to connect these. And then it's going to invoke a subscriber. Now, in our case, we are choosing, in my opinion, the most interesting subscriber, which is import scenario, which is like manipulate data, do something. We're not just telling people that the order is in this status and we're about to change it, although you could add that as an additional subscriber to this if people needed that notification. But what we are choosing is import scenario. Okay, one other comment I'm going to make before we look at the import scenario, because I want people to be able to use this recording as a way to repeat this, is I tested this a couple of different ways, and I talked to Acumatica support, and one of the things that they recommend is basically creating the import scenario through this dialog. Not that you have to do this. This is just like a tip that helps things along. So just the same way I chose create subscriber and chose import scenario from that dropdown. If you create it that way, it inherits some useful values that links the business event to the import scenario. Alternately, you could already have the import scenario configured and you could link it here. But what I've learned, and this is just a tip, is it is a little bit smoother and easier if when you're building this from scratch, you choose create subscriber, import scenario, and it takes you to the import scenario build screen, which I'll show you now. When you get to the import scenario build screen, the thing that's populated for you already is the provider. So the provider here says business event underscore, and then the GI. So it's just a little more helpful and friendly that that's populated. And that's also why I'm saying this isn't required. It's just something that will help you as a builder. So we've also got the import scenario name. So BE, business event, IS, import scenario. And then I named it exactly the same, order status change. That's what we're here for. And in this case, there's another, I think, possible pitfall when you're thinking about the screen name that's meant to be called here. One of the mistakes I made was I was tempted to go and pull the generic inquiry as the screen name, but that's not what you're meant to do. You're meant to say this, like the screen that we are affecting, okay? And this will feel familiar if you've built other import scenarios, but the screen that we are affecting is the sales order screen that ships with acuMatica. And then the provider is the business event that we've been building as our hinge. And the provider object is essentially the result of that. Okay, so we go into, well, yes, you can choose previous results, which would be if you wanted to track the before and after values, you can get somewhat sophisticated with that. So one of the things that's helpful is if you've got any other import scenarios to look at that ship with the system, that is very helpful. But what you must do is identify the keys in the sales order DAC, data access class. So what you may want to do is check the DAC schema browser to identify the primary key or primary keys associated with that DAC, because those need to be declared. So this was another area that can get a little bit tricky because you must define those and then configure them correctly. And acuMatica helps you along to some degree, but you may have to do some testing. So one of the things that I just want to point out on this is, so we're mapping the key of order type and the key of order number. Those are the primary keys associated with the sales order DAC. Because we need to make sure, and as we're doing our mapping, that it's not just order number SO00019, but we need to make sure we're matching on the sales order type, because that is a primary key. So we map those, then hit this action of save, and then we'll see kind of the fun stuff happens. So this is where we're actually taking our action. So this is the so what of our import scenario. So the action is that we're removing it from hold and we're setting the value to active. And then I wrote a little formula, if you remember, that this sales order description was that it was put on hold for Maria. So what I'm doing is I'm going to update the description also. I'll retain the original description that the user added, but I'm going to add a suffix that says it was updated by BEIS, business event import scenario, order status change, so that it's clear to my users what happened.
Hey,
so
Arline,
this is, yes, listening.
We have a question
okay.
about this. If you already have a working import scenario with an Excel provider, can you switch it to a business event provider?
I have had, well, I think you mean a generic inquiry as the provider. Oh, business event provider. Oh, I have had trouble. I have not found that it's like a one-to-one mapping between setting up an Excel provider and using a business event as a provider. I would try it, but I would not be confident. So when I was building this and troubleshooting this, one of the ways I tested was using an Excel provider and testing that I could get the results that I wanted, right? I wanted to take these orders off hold. And one of the ways I tested and was troubleshooting this whole hinge process was by testing, can I just do this with an Excel provider? And the Excel provider worked great. So I have not found it easy to map them, like to just switch the provider, but you should test. But I suppose if you're using an Excel sheet as your input, to me that sort of implies, and you can chat to Donna in case my assumption's wrong, but to me it sort of implies that maybe there's user input involved, that it's something that you couldn't otherwise get from the results of a generic inquiry, which is fully dynamic, right? A generic inquiry is just like whatever results fall through the filter we get, but an Excel sheet you can manipulate on a very detailed level on each row. So it implies to me that you might have a different business need.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Feel free to ask more. Okay, so just to come back to this is our description. I'm trying to communicate, and you can tell that's a bit of a theme here, right? With the naming conventions being consistent, and then this updated by the import scenario, just trying to communicate out to the users and other people in the system what's been happening. Sometimes this stuff happens silently, and it can be confusing for people. Okay, so then the last step in this import scenario is that we save. So that's not too many steps in this scenario. So in the time that I've been sort of showing this, our event has run because it's running every 2 minutes. And when you get to the business event history, you can see what has happened. And this is an important, but also I would say imperfect troubleshooting page. You've got to check the history to see what has happened. But sometimes I have come to this screen and there are no records at all. You don't know why. So that's why I'm saying it's imperfect. And one of the, I guess, pitfalls for me is, or that I'll suggest, is like try to start as simply as you can with a simple inquiry and a simple event and a simple import scenario, because it's much easier to troubleshoot that and then build up. There are sometimes records here that just say the record failed to process. It can be, I have found it pretty tough to trace a nice detail on why certain things have failed. But one of the recommendations is typically to try to do something through the UI and see if you're really capturing that precisely in the import scenario steps. So you can try that, or you can try dismantling some of the complexity that you've embedded in all your wisdom and trying to make things simpler, both on the inquiry side and on the import scenario side. Of course, for this demo, everything worked fine. So here we are just showing that it was executed successfully. And what I'm going to do now is basically refresh the screen, because right now it's on hold, but I want to refresh the screen to show the results of the business event. So what we are hoping and intending to see is that this order is not on hold anymore. Okay, so we can see the status is open. And you can see that sort of additional suffix on the description is in place. So we still kept the original description. I mean, that's up to you. That's sort of a business choice. You could wipe it out. But what I chose to do was preserve that and then add this suffix to make it clear that it was updated via this order status change inquiry. Okay, so I'm just going to summarize a few things, and I'm really happy to take questions or think through anything that maybe has come up as you've watched this. So just to summarize, this business event helps link these two things, the inquiry and the subscriber. In our case, the subscriber is an import scenario, which is the most interesting subscriber because it can change and manipulate data. The pitfalls that I wanted to point out a lot of it is really communication. So using your naming conventions to make it clear to you and to other users when you go troubleshoot this in 9 months, it's really helpful to see how they're all linked. And another thing is really around simplicity. So trying to like dismantle the complexity that you may have put in when you're troubleshooting. Just try to make a simple action happen. That can be like quite a lot of effort. And then one thing that I didn't mention, but that is called out on one post on the Acumatica forum, but I want to share, is that if you're using grouping in the inquiry, the business event won't run. So this is tough. It's a limitation because it's very reasonable that you would want to have grouping in your inquiry if you're, I don't know, summing up someone's invoice totals over a certain amount of time or doing some aggregate queries. And then you wanted to take action on, say, the customers that have this aggregate scenario in place. It will fail, but it won't tell you why. So just be aware that the group by in an inquiry is not supported now. I tried to get around this by writing custom SQL and uploading that custom SQL as a DAC and sort of trying to outsmart the system with that, but I was not successful with that. So I'll just point that out. I don't know if that's a forever thing, but it's relevant, and I just would want to make sure that as people are using this and referencing this to build your own business events, that's just a gotcha to avoid. Okay. Thanks for joining. And if anyone wants to talk to me about about generic inquiries and business events and import scenarios, feel free to ask me now, or you can contact me through acuCONNECT. But thanks for the opportunity. I think this is a really important and useful part of Acumatica.